I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. In this engaging conversation, Dr. Parham shares her journey as a behavior scientist, her experiences as a first-generation PhD graduate, and her passion for values-based living. She discusses her insights on burnout in the field of behavior analysis and the importance of community. Dr. Parham emphasizes the need for self-reflection and collective values in building strong communities, particularly within the context of behavior analysis and education. Welcome to the podcast, Jewel.
Thank you for having me.
Stoked. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge I'm producing this podcast on the territories of the club. So, Jill, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So, my name is Dr. Parham. I'm a proud boy mom to a teenager. He will be heading to high school next year, so that's exciting. I'm a behavior scientist, a first-generation PhD graduate, a proud HBCU graduate, so a historically black college and university graduate. I am also a diehard Philadelphia Eagles fan, so go Birds. And I am pretty much all about values-based living and just living in alignment with, my values and my beliefs. I'm also passionate about, helping individuals create meaningful behavior change. So that's been pretty much what I've been doing since I started in the workforce. So I've been in the field for over 15 years now, and I've supported children, teens, and adults with and without developmental disabilities in a variety of settings. So I have worked in public and private schools, center-based programs, and in-home and community-based services. And right now, I am a school-based consultant, so I collaborate with educators and interdisciplinary teams, supporting students with diverse educational and behavioral needs. So what that kind of looks like for me on a day-to-day is developing individualized interventions, training staff, and promoting neurodiversity affirming practices within the school settings that I work in.
Let's go back to a bit of the beginning. Every now and then I like to kind of revisit some of these terms for folks, because for some folks listening to the podcast, it's the first time they've heard sort of some of these things. And you talked about being use the term first generation. Can you just tell folks sort of what that means and sort of what that experience has been like, sort of having these experiences for the first time?
Yeah, so I'm the first person in my family to earn a doctoral degree. So I'm the first one to, be a PhD student in my family. So for me, that's been very exciting, to be able to kind of like model that, lifelong love of learning and education for my son. So, and then just, for my ancestors, being able to be the first in the family does give me this kind of, feeling that I've done something for my family and kind of done some things that maybe some other, women in my family couldn't do because they were working and parenting and having responsibilities in a way that during those times they weren't allowed to, go to college or go get a master's degree or even have an opportunity, because it was, when my grandma may have been growing up, not even something that, Black women or men were doing at the time. So grateful that I am the first in my family that was able to accomplish, earning a doctoral degree.
So did you grow up, were you raised to sort of believe that education was really important? Like, what made you decide to sort of go this far?
Yeah, I think my parents were always, they both did attend college. They didn't finish. And I always had, individuals in my life who looked like me that did go to college. So I was a big fan of the different world. I talk about it all the time growing up. So I saw, people on TV that looked like me going to college and going through these experiences, in a college setting. And I was just like, okay, like, this is what I'm doing. I watched the Cosbys and I looked at, Clara Huxtable, and, I always remember seeing, women, on TV at that time when I was growing up who were educated Black women. And so it was always something I've always loved school. I would still be in school if it was for free and I could just do it for a living. So, being able to, be the first to do that and have, a PhD in behavior analysis, it was just, something that I said I was going to do, and that's what I did.
And you talked about going to an HBCU. Tell me about where you went and what that was like.
Yeah, I went to Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. So that was just a great experience. It's a smaller women's college, right? Pretty much around the corner from North Carolina A&T. So that's a pretty large and predominant HBCU. I believe it's 107 HBCU. So that was always just such a great experience. And, I would recommend to any Black girl, boy in high school who's looking for colleges to consider looking at HBCUs because I think you just come out with this well-rounded experience of kind of understanding who you are as a Black person and learning about your history and your culture and just being in a space that's really supportive of, Black and brown people.
So tell me about kind of how you got into the field, how you found behavior analysis.
Yeah, I knew when I graduated from high school that I wanted to, be in the field of psychology. So my mother at the time was working for a mental health hospital, and I would go visit, from time to time or be there when she was getting off of work. So at first, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. So, I was taking my psychology courses in undergrad, and I finished and I ended up working for a large provider in the area, kind of like filling out different opportunities there while I was in school getting my master's. And when I got out, my first job was as a behavior specialist. And my supervisor happened to be a BCBA. And he would always say, like, you should go take the courses and you should become a BCBA. But I had just finished. And I was like, I'm not going back to take any other courses. So it took me a while, but eventually I did take his advice, Dr. Richard Allen. So I always have to credit him because I wasn't thinking about behavior analysis. I didn't know what behavior analysis was. I don't remember it being discussed at any point in my, academic career prior to meeting my supervisor and him saying like, okay, this is who I am and this is what I do. And it kind of like went that way. And I kind of just like loved it and was like, okay, I really liked what I was doing in my role. And I'm in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, we have right now a licensed behavior specialist. So we don't have a behavior analyst license. So you can pretty much provide the same type of services as a licensed behavior specialist as a BCBA. So even though I'm a BCBA, I still have to maintain my behavior specialist license. And I had that license before I was a BCBA.
And I was wondering about that. So I don't know a lot about regulation. I'm in Canada. We have one province right now that has regulation. Ontario just started this year. What makes sort of the LBS differ maybe from other regulations?
So they do have requirements on a specific type of training that you need to fulfill, and they do need to have documentation about like your coursework. So whatever, institution you're at has to sign off and kind of verify that you have, are able to provide services to, individuals diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. In order to, provide, you can be a behavior specialist and work with children with other developmental disabilities, but to work with children with autism, you need to be a recipient of this licensed behavior specialist credential. So in Pennsylvania right now, that is the way they are, making sure people are qualified or trained to be able to provide certain services while, the ABA providers in Pennsylvania are working to kind of get the behavior analyst licensure. And they've been doing that for quite some time, but for whatever the reasons, that has not happened yet. So the behavior specialist license is still, the route that most individuals who are providing services take.
So you said you kind of learned about behavior analysis from the professor there. When did you sort of have your first experience sort of outside of the classroom?
That was my first experience outside of me working for, like I said, I mentioned I started at this like large mental health provider when I was getting my master's degree. So once I finished, I went to like a community-based service, and that's where the supervisor was a BCBA. So I kind of came right out, and they were like, okay, we have these cases, and I started out as a behavior specialist. So before I was in the school, I started in home and community services. So going into people's houses, during the day or after, school time in the evenings was how I started out for quite some time. I think I did that for like 9 years.
And so what made you decide to go back and do the PhD? What was sort of the goal there?
I've always really enjoyed school, but I really did want to kind of like expand on. So I came through under the fourth task list. So those 6 courses. And so I really wanted to continue learning about behavior analysis. Like I felt like the 6 courses were, yes, I learned. I took the exam and passed the test. but I wanted to kind of dive deeper and expand my understanding and knowledge of behavior analysis and not just the ABA domain. I wanted to, learn more about, experimental analysis of behavior and radical behaviorism and just kind of like dive into some of the coursework that, wasn't necessarily covered under those 6 classes that I took to prepare for the exam.
And where'd you do your doctorate?
I did my doctorate at the Chicago School, and it was the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Now they're going by the Chicago School. In my dissertation, I was looking at burnout among behavior analysts. So that's often talked about during a lot of CEs and a lot of podcasts. So, it's a growing concern that, affects our job performance, our well-being. So I kind of wanted to explore an approach that was like flexible and meaningful enough to kind of support, real people who are doing emotionally, taxing and demanding work.
So what kind of questions were you trying to answer in your dissertation?
I was looking to kind of see, okay, so, we know that, a lot of newly minted or, first year BCBAs are coming out. They're starting with these agencies and they're like, I'm burned out, within the first year, maybe within the first 3 to 6 months. So I really am thinking, forward and saying, okay, like what can we, as behavior analysts do to kind of mitigate burnout? Like what can be put in place, during our training as student analysts to kind of be able to prepare us to go into this role and not be ready to like tap out within the first year. So I had come across Gardner and Moore. They had a mindfulness acceptance commitment approach. And so they were looking at athletes, so like elite performers, so people who are very good at, if it was volleyball or hockey or whatever sport, and kind of looking at performance dysfunction, looking at that performance and well-being piece. So I was like, oh, this is like great. This is an acceptance-based behavioral approach to performance enhancement. And like, what do we do? Like, we're expected to perform. So people are thinking we have this like magic wand and we're going to come in and make everything better in like one day, 1 week, 1 month. So I was like, okay, this is me. I think, I'm in alignment with this mindfulness acceptance commitment approach. And, it just really piqued my interest. So I was like, okay, talking to my committee and okay, like how can I look and see how it's a semi-structured 7-module model and it blended mindfulness and like values-based action. So I wanted to see, okay, how can this influence work-related values-directed behavior? So we have to give feedback. So if that was, something that I value, could this, MAC model or MAC approach, influence, how I'm delivering feedback, or if positive staff interactions is a work-related values-directed behavior that I want to improve. So, looking at this, MAC module alongside, using measures to look at burnout, emotion regulation, and psychological flexibility. So, I enjoyed the whole dissertation process. It's definitely a grueling one and one that kind of tests your limits and your patience and everything under the clear blue sun. But, I did want to kind of, open the door for others to kind of see this research and maybe want to expand or extend what I've done, with the MAC module. And hopefully, I can continue on, but I have lots of research interests. So, it's just one area that I'm interested in is this practitioner burnout and, well-being, but just something that I felt like was meaningful and impactful that I wanted to, explore during the dissertation process.
And so what kind of things did you kind of learn there? Was this MAC module sort of an effective tool for sort of changing the way folks were delivering feedback and that sort of thing? Do you have a credential with the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or would like a certificate of attendance for another organization? You can earn continuing education units by going to www.behaviorspeak.com, clicking on CEUs, and entering the 3 secret words. The first secret word is...
Hey y'all, it's Quintara Tucker here, aka the Mystical Analyst on Instagram. Now let me ask you something. Are you stuck exploring different career paths in ABA? Do you need to update that resume or CV? Or have you ever dreamed of speaking at different ABA conferences but don't know where to begin? If the answer is yes, then my 4-week virtual multicultural mentorship program is for you. During the program, we'll dive into career growth, branding, public speaking, and more. And you guessed it, all through a culturally responsive lens. We meet once a week starting August 4th all the way through August 25th. And don't worry, if you cannot attend live, the sessions will be recorded. Spots are limited, so join us and start becoming the BCBA that you are meant to be. For more information or to sign up, click the link in my Instagram bio or visit www.qbconsulting1.
Yeah, I ended up having like mixed results from my study, and not to get
Right.
into a whole like dissertation spill, but really with the social validity questionnaire, participants really, they felt like they found value in, the modules. They felt like, there was improvement in psychological flexibility, like mindful attention, mindful awareness. These were some of the like the core components of the MAC module. So just looking at like performance and like where did they see themselves and how, kind of like having this task focused attention to like whatever that work related values directed, behavior they were thinking about, increasing, kind of having that, ability to kind of sit with that. And that's kind of like all of the, the mindfulness and acceptance commitment piece was looking at like, even though these difficult things come up for us, when we're trying to, perform at our best, like how are we approaching it? Are we moving towards our values in our actions and our behaviors, or are we, doing what they call like opposite action? So I think, based off of, feedback from, the social ability questionnaire, like it was impactful in that way. So definitely something I would like to extend, in the future and kind of continue working on seeing like what we can do to help, mitigate burnout so that you aren't just coming out and passing your exam. And then, like I said, in 3 or 6 months or a year, you're like, I don't think that this is the career for me anymore because I'm too overwhelmed or too overworked.
Talked at the beginning about how values-based living is really important to you. Tell me a little bit more about that. Maybe tell me a little bit about kind of what your values are.
Yeah. So I think I like to say I'm a grown woman, but I'm a growing woman. So very much trying to always move in alignment with things that I value and things that I find important. So, family and education and integrity and community are, values. So in my day to day, whether it's personal or professional practice, like that is what I'm leading with, living in alignment with my values.
And of course, that kind of falls into some of your research interests around working in ACT. Where you're sharing a bit about some of your other research interests. And one of them that is standing out to me is something I haven't heard of before is algorithmic bias. Tell me why you have an interest in that and what that even means.
Yeah, so I'm a person who watches Netflix from time to time, and I can get into, a lot of different content on there. But, at the time I end up, one day watching Coded Bias. And so it was looking at Dr. Joy Bulamwini and her work on algorithmic bias and just some work that she was doing at the time when she was at MIT, I believe. I just was like floored just to think about, we already talk about biases, quite often and how they come up, in healthcare or in education or, in the criminal justice system. But thinking about, biases in AI systems, and I was just like, wow, like this is something that isn't always at the forefront of the conversation. And it really should be. So I kind of like dived into like looking into what she was doing. And it just so happened to be, I think I probably looked at, her documentary. And then, fast forward a few years later, like now, the conversation of, AI and behavior analysis is coming up and how, automation and using certain AI systems to like enhance, what we're doing as, practitioners. So I was like, okay, like if we're going to start using AI more, we would need to be aware of, the biases in AI systems because, right, AI is not flawless, despite what some people may think. And there are biases and it does cause harm. So I had the opportunity to do a presentation at Batcage, at the Gulf Coast Association of ABA in Louisiana with some colleagues from the Chicago School in October. So something that I'm obviously interested in and want to also continue like, having research opportunities to kind of talk about algorithmic biases or biases in AI systems. Because if you're going to be using ChatGPT, if you're going to use any of these other AI systems, you should be aware of the harm that they can potentially cause based on the data that they're trained on. Because, a lot of times it's the people who are giving the information to these learning systems, the machine learning systems. And clearly people are biased. So just another area in behavior analysis that, is kind of like up and coming. There's, other individuals who have been speaking on it in the field, maybe not necessarily about algorithmic bias, but talking about, behavior analysis and this integration of AI.
And so, I mean, it's early days, but what are kind of some of your ideas or thoughts on sort of, how behavior analysts at least should incorporate that idea? Are we essentially, when we're putting in a prompt or asking a question, just making sure that we're still reflecting on the information that's coming out?
Yep, making sure that, that you already are understanding of, implicit biases and how, these relational frames that have been reinforced over time are working, So you as a behavior analyst having that understanding before you go and ask for an intervention for a student, to be conscious of, if you're asking for intervention for a white student, is it more rooted in praise? And if you're asking for intervention for a Black student, is it more, in punishment? So important considerations for us as behavior analysts as we all as a society continue to use AI, and, just something that we should be thinking about as well.
Yeah, I never really thought about sort of how the answer to the question might change with AI if I'm specific with those questions. And so is the thought that then, using that example, should one not indicate sort of the race or whatever or the color when they're asking the question, so they can get a more sort of succinct answer? Or are they just going to end up getting an answer that's sort of geared towards white folks anyway, because it was probably a white person that programmed it?
Right. I think it's opening to the door for us to kind of look at like what role we can play in prompt engineering, and what role we can play in being, an assistance to the coders, and, bringing behavior analysis to, the tech world, and being a part of some of these systems that are being created. So it's kind of like, that's what I'm thinking about. My colleagues, Dr. Andrews and Dr. Danielle Judy, and thinking about, okay, so how can we leverage relational frame theory? How can we leverage, what we know about relational frames to help coders, or help, individuals in tech who are creating these systems? That way, the information that they're trained on is aware of these biases, and or the trainer themselves is aware of these biases. So as humans, we know we have implicit biases, and, I do think the onus is on us as behavior analysts to, teach individuals about how we can go about approaching our biases, our own biases.
Because I think it would be very easy for someone who's, a kind of green to the whole AI thing to sort of come at this from a more kind of science fiction lens, where, you think about sort of,
Right. Absolutely. That understanding that like AI is not flawless. It's not perfect. And like you said, like those programmers are humans, and we know, as humans, we're not perfect, and we do have these biases.
And I'm not all that well versed in sort of AI. I've had a couple conversations in the podcast about it, and sort of scratching the surface. Do you think there'll be a point in time where, AI itself can sort of self-reflect and have some humility?
I think that would be great. And I've never claimed to be a know-it-all about tech. I never claimed to be a know-it-all about behavior analysis, because I think there is no such thing as a know-it-all. But, some people use the word expert. I don't always agree with that term, but I think, we do have a science that we can use to, work alongside, these programmers or developers or tech companies to try to make society a better place. So we don't always know, what lies ahead in the future, but we do have, things in our toolbox, so to speak, that we can utilize to make society better.
You said that you presented at a Bat Cage, and you've got something coming up with a couple other folks. So what kinds of things are you folks going to be getting into related to this?
We are doing a presentation at Association of Contextual Behavior Science in July, and we're going to be talking about racial biases. So Dr. Meredith Andrews, her wheelhouse and her passion is relational frame theory. Dr. Danielle Judy has done a lot of work. Her dissertation work was on colorism and mindfulness and perspective taking. I don't want to talk too much about her dissertation research, because I'm sure she'll be talking about that at some point. So just bringing it all in and tying it into just, what we do as behavior analysts in our day in and day out. And like I said, making these systems that we use better. So that's just one of the presentations that I have coming up. And then I have a workshop with Dr. Ashley Kerrigan at Women in Behavior Analysis. So we are going to do something fun and innovative. I'm always trying to do our best to, incorporate technology into what we're doing. And then I'm going to be talking about my dissertation research as well. And then I have a panel with Quintera and Olivia and Dr. Danielle Judy and Ashley Lewis is on that as well. So couple things coming up, and I'll be presenting with Dr. Dale Judy and Dr. Shelby Dunnigan at Babacon 2025, so in beautiful Jamaica in September the 18th to the 21st. So I'm really excited about that. I've not been to, so many conferences, in total anyway. I'm newer to, the conference scene, maybe within the past, 3 or 4 years. I think my first conference maybe was in WEBA in 2021, I think, in Nashville. Maybe 22. I don't remember. I lost a little bit track of time with the whole pandemic. So, but I think it was either 21 or 22. So somebody can look that up and correct me. But, so I'm excited to attend a conference, out of the country. So we'll be in Jamaica, and we're going to be, the title of our presentation is Black Dollars Matter. So leveraging behavioral economics to build financial empowerment. So kind of really excited because Dr. Shelby, she did work, her dissertation research was kind of looking at the, like a firm or Klarna, like that, buy now, pay later. So I was always excited for her, that being her dissertation research, because I thought like, wow, this is such a great topic. And so when we were thinking about like, what can we do to fall in theme with Baba and, reclaiming our vibes is their theme and, Black liberation. And so what better way to talk about Black dollars and, the power of the Black dollar. But acknowledging that there are systemic barriers and, immediate needs that often kind of shape how, Black dollars are spent. So we're going to leverage, what we know from behavioral economics and discuss concepts like reinforcement and, delay discounting to help, our audience better understand Black spending patterns and talk about supporting value-driven financial choices. So thinking about building generational wealth. So I don't want to give away too much from what we're going to be talking about, but definitely excited. And Danielle and Shelby were in my cohort at the Chicago schools. It makes it even, more meaningful to me to present with them, two other Black women who are, BCBADs as well, with PhDs in behavior analysis. So that to me is extremely meaningful and in alignment with my values of community. So I'm really excited and honored, that we were selected to be a part and present and speak at Babacon 2025.
Yeah, that sounds like it's going to be amazing. And tell me a little bit about what you've got so many cool people on this panel. What's the purpose of the panel? What will you folks be getting into there?
Yeah, so Quintera talked about the panel. She was recently, her episode came out.
Yeah.
So last year at WEBA in Atlanta, her and Olivia had came up with this like really great panel, discussing, barriers for Black women in ABA. And continue to kind of like build on, this topic and, adding, new individuals to, the panel. So always having somebody who is more, new to speaking opportunities and then adding someone who has, more experience in the field. So kind of to, mix up the panel participants and, give audiences an opportunity to see new people speaking. So that's how I got involved was, this was Quintera and Olivia's idea, and they're both like doc students. So, it's again in alignment with what I'm trying to do for the community, what I'm trying to do, for myself personally and professionally. So exciting to be up there and for WEBA to give us the opportunity to get up there and talk about some of these barriers we face, as Black women in ABA.
Awesome. So it's a good segue. Mentioning community, something you kind of reached out and said that community has been something of mind lately. I wonder if you could expand a bit on kind of some of the stuff you've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, community, I mentioned I went to, a historically Black college, community was very big, is very big at HBCUs. And I just kept coming back to this theme of community. And I just kept seeing different things on, social media on Instagram, different memes or posts about community. And I saw something one day by Mukaz, I believe was her name. And she was talking about, community and just really centering that, yeah, there's a lot of talk about community, but there's, very little understanding of how to actually build community or to live in community. And that like resonated with me in a way that I don't even think words right now can describe. Just this idea of, yeah, we're talking about community all the time. You'll see the word community often, but there is not a lot of understanding of how to actually build it, live in it, like to be in community. So I was like, oh, this is definitely something that just keeps coming back to me. Community is a product of, learned behaviors that have been reinforced over time. So what community looks like for me can be very different than someone else who's actually in the same community as me. So think about, our community of behavior analysts. My community may look very different than, a behavior analyst who could be right here in Pennsylvania or who could be in Florida or who could be, anywhere in the United States or abroad. So just thinking about what community looks like, and we can't expect community without reinforcing, operant behaviors that sustain cooperation, that sustain honest feedback, shared goals, mutual aid. And I think sometimes there's this, confusion that proximity is community. And just because we're in the same room or we share the same space or environment, that doesn't necessarily mean we share the same trust, the same care, or even the same accountability. So, community is something that's built, not assumed. And it truly requires, an intentionality, effort, and really an investment, a mutual investment. So it just keeps coming back to me over and over again about how much, it takes to truly build community and what that looks like, especially, thinking about collectivism and, we're living in like this individualistic world. And, so how do you teach collectivism, to people who are, being raised and rewarded, to be individuals? So it just keeps coming back to me over and over again, like thinking about, community and collectivism and like, thinking about core tenets of collectivism and resource sharing, again, like that mutual trust and, being vulnerable and building, relationships that are ongoing relationships and, centering the needs of the group and not just like my own needs. What does that look like? And, how do I maintain that? So I think, there's a lot more to community than just a little sound bite or just saying like, I'm all for community or I love community or I want to be in community. Like, yeah, you might want to be in community, but do you know how to build it and maintain it and sustain it? So
Yeah, I mean, that makes me think, the worldviews. It was you talked about self-reflection a lot, and it was an area, it was a behavior that it was a skill I did not have, and only because of sort of a bunch of things lining up, I was sort of, kind of in some ways kind of pushed into it, and started picking up on a lot of things that were, really kind of mind blowing, around my own biases and around sort of the ways of the world. And when I started kind of having conversations with folks, somebody used to say early on in the podcast was really said it much recently was one of the reasons I like doing this so much is because I got to talk to people with completely different worldviews and completely and sort of often a lot less privilege than I had, and they were so much more interesting to talk to. And because I wasn't hearing sort of the same old story kind of over and over again. And one thing that started to resonate more and more, especially as I started talking to people from sort of different countries around the world. But particularly when I was talking to, I think a lot of Black Americans and a lot of indigenous North Americans area, and talking about sort of this young Senegalese autistic child living in the community and how it was typical in this sort of neighborhood for this kid just to wander the streets and wander the neighborhoods. He'd wander into people's houses on a random basis. Sort of in a lot of ways we might sort of frame or conceptualize as elopement, and sort of, but in this community, this was just normal. They all expected the kid to roam around the neighborhood. They all had no problem with them coming into the house. Every time he came into the house, they'd feed him or offer him something. And it became just this really sort of safe space for, this kid who in my neighborhood, I'd be calling the police in 10 minutes to protect him. And it made me just think, this is a sort of a philosophy and ideal that's just been built generationally, so that there's a certain level of trust, this level of connection between everyone in the community. And it just blew my mind that something like that would exist.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned about what you've learned kind of from, when you started out doing this podcast over time, it's like the importance of, having, perspective or views from individuals outside of our own, and to kind of be able to, self-reflect. And I think that's, something that that's not something that you just learn overnight, right? It requires modeling. It is going to possibly require some obviously new learning, but really a lot of unlearning and a real deep value shift sometimes. And, it's okay to, self reflect. And sometimes, when I'm on Instagram, I really want to stop and ask people, like, do y'all really self reflect? Because it kind of seems like, that's another word that can kind of be, out there and thrown around. But, is there really, a global understanding about, self reflection? And if, we're talking about community, I think self reflection is definitely a prerequisite, to community. So, are you really self reflecting? And, when we talk about community, we have to start with self, and we can look at that from a behavior analytic lens and, think about, self reflection isn't just about, thinking deeply. It's about, self knowing and self management. And I remember when I started my dissertation process, one of my committee members at the time, she had shared a manuscript that she was working on, and I'm referring to Dr. Garcia. She's no longer at the Chicago School, but she was there, and she was working on this manuscript with Dr. Nasser, and they had framed a self-reflection as a pattern of behavior. And they were talking about it as something, we can observe, something we can teach, and something we can reinforce. And they also talked about, self-knowing as operant behavior shaped by verbal communities. And what they were reminding us in, their manuscript was really awareness alone just isn't enough. So, having awareness, it just isn't enough. You need systems like self-monitoring. You need replacement behaviors to, truly shift how you show up in community spaces. You can't just say, I want to be in community and not do the work. So I think, building community again really starts with like knowing yourself, knowing your values, knowing, your habits, your patterns. It's not about being like perfectly self-aware, but it is about, building this understanding, or building a repertoire that helps you stay aligned with your values. So, especially when it's hard. And I think, as a society, as people, as, individuals, that's where, the struggles come in, when it gets hard, when you're in community. So, you have to sit with yourself sometimes and, really be prepared to, have, those talks with yourself and self-reflect and have that, knowing piece because you know yourself. So now you know your values, you know your habits, again, you know your patterns. So, when the going gets tough, as my grandma used to say, like when it gets hard, you know how to move, in community, even if, conflict arises because, we're humans and conflict is, a part of, the human experience. So you have to think about conflict as well, and, building community and what authentic community looks like because you can have conflict and still be in community, but you have to be able to have, a resolution. So that needs to be mutual, and not necessarily performative or for profit speak, your feelings are valid with no action. So, I think, you know, that's something that we can need to consider in community as well. Like not only knowing yourself, but knowing yourself and having, the ability to self reflect when, conflict comes up in community. And I think, we see, individuals like Denisha who, talk about, what conflict looks like and how do you rebuild. And you see Baba kind of giving us that model of like, if something goes on, this is how we bounce back. So, definitely a shout out to them for modeling for, the rest of the community, what it, might look like to kind of sit with yourself and sit with those who you're in community with to continue building community, even if something comes up that's difficult or something comes up that's, might be hard.
The second secret word is mindfulness.
¿Eres profesional, estudiante o entusiasta del análisis conductual aplicado? Entonces tienes una cita este 27, 28 y 29 de agosto de 2025 en Oaxaca, México, en el segundo Congreso Bienal de la Organización Mexicana de Practicantes del Análisis Conductual Aplicado, OMPAC, construyendo una mejor vida y un mayor bienestar con el análisis conductual aplicado. El miércoles 27 de agosto nos arrancamos con una jornada de talleres especializados impartidos por líderes internacionales como el Dr. William Heward, Dr. Greg Hanley, el maestro Troy Fry, maestro Miguel Ávila, el Dr. Lee Mason, la doctora Rocío Rosales, el maestro Alonso Andrews y la doctora Janet Sánchez Enríquez. Los días 28 y 29 de agosto viviremos un Single Track Conference con conferencias magistrales de grandes referentes del campo y entre ellos Dr. Timothy Ballmer, Dr. Neil Martin, el Dr. Patrick Fryman, el maestro Troy Fry, el maestro Miguel Ávila, la doctora Janet Twyman, el Dr. Robert Ross, el Dr. Jonathan Ferdinand, Dr. Robert Pennington, el Dr. Fernando Armendáriz, la doctora Silvia Morales Chainé, el Dr. Juan José Sánchez Sosa, el maestro Brandon Franklin, el Dr. Alejandro León, la doctora Varsovia Hernández Eslava, la doctora Violeta Félix, el Dr. Edgar Landa, el Dr. Everardo Aguilar, la maestra Mariana de los Santos. Contaremos con la traducción simultánea a inglés y el español al inglés para asegurar el acceso y la participación de una audiencia verdaderamente internacional. Además, los CEUs están incluidos en la inscripción. Tendrás la oportunidad de establecer redes de colaboración con colegas de toda América Latina y hasta otras regiones. Consulta todos los detalles y inscríbete en www.ompac.mx. Nos vemos en Oaxaca para seguir fortaleciendo el análisis conductual aplicado en Latinoamérica.
And then Dr. Olizi, she's done some really good work around kind of self-reflection and kind of conceptualizing that more. I want to check out the work you were talking about with Dr. Garcia
Yeah,
too.
and Dr. Garcia and Dr. Nasser, she actually is working with like athletes and doing some cool stuff with hockey players. But I know
Yes, of course. Yes.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
mentioned Dr. Nasia, obviously her article about, barriers to Black women in ABA is definitely a big inspiration for the panel. And I believe Quintera mentioned her when she was talking to you. So definitely a lot of, Black women in the field doing good work. And I love to see it because, it serves as a model for myself. It serves as a model for others who don't always, get to see that representation. So I think we can always continue to learn from one another, have those different perspectives outside of our own, and really, sit with ourselves and ask ourselves, who am I? What do I bring into the spaces I'm in? And am I acting in alignment, with the kind of community I say I want? So I think those are definitely important considerations for us as behavior analysts and, for all humans. So especially as we kind of are, in these kind of, contentious times that I know everybody is, aware of, but that self-reflection piece and that self-knowing and being able to really have conversations with yourself and you think about, what you're going to do when, again, like that going gets tough and, what are you going to do when it gets difficult and how do you, still, move towards the life that you want or the community you want, when things kind of, come up and things get difficult and you have those, difficult thoughts or feelings or bodily sensations. So, I think, community again is something that I value and it's something that is always at the forefront of the work that I'm doing. I don't just do, the things that I'm doing for myself. I do it, representing, Black women and Black people. And I hope that, some little Black and brown girl or boy somewhere sees, in me, a model for, community and for you can do whatever it is that you really want to do, when you sit with yourself and you know who you are and you know what you value.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you talked about some of those bodily feelings that folks are having, and I feel like maybe some folks even listening to this episode will maybe this is bringing up some stuff for them and some thoughts and some feelings. And so, I think this is an opportunity right here, right in this moment when you're listening to kind of get into those processes. Because I know for me, and I hear you, self-reflection is difficult to do on your own. And so having some guidance around it, having some support when you're doing can be develop some sort of intellectual connections to things that were going on in the world that I just hadn't been paying attention to most of my life, and started getting, lots of physical pains and things in the body. And I talk about this, I share this example a lot, that Dr. Nasia really, she doesn't know it. I don't think she realizes it, but she's played a huge part in the direction my life turned, because she put on these workshops like a week after the murder, to help folks like myself learn how to self-reflect on what they were feeling about all this, so we could kind of guide it in a good direction. And so I think for folks that are listening, if you're having these feelings, it's an opportunity.
Absolutely. And she's such, a great, model for, behavior analysts in general. But, she's awesome and whatever insight and wisdom, if you have the opportunity to, attend any of her presentations or hear her talk or speak, like you're walking away, with, some gems. So she is definitely someone who I think is a great representation, and who has like made opportunities and created space for people like myself and Quintera and Shelby and Danielle and Mandy, and I could name, so many other, Black women in the field, and Dr. Nasia definitely, has helped create opportunities and space for us. So she is always appreciated by, everyone in my sister circles. Again, I'm a person, I'm for a community, and I, know that you don't always, go along, get along. You don't always like everything everyone says or does. Like we are adults and we have differences and we come to, any space or any table with our own biases. But, collectively, I think, when we go together, we do things better. And I didn't intentionally mean to rhyme, but I do believe that, even with my doc program, I could not have gotten through that program without, my community, without my sister circle, without, people who share, similar values and goals. Like it is much easier to have people to be in community with than to do everything on your own or feel like you have to have all the answers or you have to sit with, discomfort alone. Like it is, great to have community and it's great to be in community. So there are sometimes things that we have to do to sustain and maintain community. And it might not be easy. It might not feel good, but, with acceptance and willingness and mindfulness and perspective taking, these are all, tools that we have, available to us to learn and practice to be able to get through this human experience. So, I will always, preach from the mountaintop about the importance of community and, especially as a Black person who, wants to advance Black representation in behavior analysis, community is extremely important to me. And, there are so many people that, I can shout out and thank, for, just even, giving me a glimmer of, inspiration or speaking my name in rooms that I'm not in because they also, believe in community and, we have these, shared values and shared goals. So I just think, community is extremely important. So I can speak about, community as a Black woman. I can speak about, community as a community of behavior analysts, community, in my neighborhood or, in the workplace. You can talk about community, in so many different, aspects or environments that we move in. So I think it's extremely important. And as behavior analysts, we should definitely be self-reflecting and knowing what our values are and knowing, how do we approach conflict if it comes up, in our community. So, stand on that soapbox, probably always.
It's awesome, Jewel. Well, this was wicked. I learned a lot about you, and I'm stoked to kind of see what comes out in the future. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
The third secret word is dialogue.
Are you a professional, a student, or an enthusiast of applied behavior analysis? Then mark your calendar for August 27, 28, and 2025. Join us in Oaxaca, Mexico for the second biennial Congress of the Mexican Organization of Practitioners of Applied Behavior Analysis, OMPAC. Building a better life and greater well-being through applied behavior analysis. On Wednesday, August 20, we'll kick off with a full day of specialized workshops led by international leaders including Dr. William Heward, Dr. Greg Hanley, Troy Fry, Miguel Avila, Dr. Lee Mason, Dr. Rocio Rosales, Alonso Andrews, and Dr. Janet Sanchez Enriquez. On August 28th and 29th, we'll host a single-track conference featuring keynote presentations by the most respected voices in the field: Dr. Timothy Vollmer, Dr. Neil Martin, Dr. Patrick Fryman, Troy Fry, Miguel Avila, Dr. Janet Twyman, Dr. Robert Ross, Dr. Jonathan Ferdinand, Dr. Robert Pennington, Dr. Fernando Armendariz, Dr. Silvia Morales Chainé, Dr. Juan José Sánchez Sosa, Brandon Franklin, Dr. Alejandro León, Dr. Varsovia Hernández Eslava, Dr. Violeta Félix, Dr. Edgar Landa, Dr. Everardo Aguilar, and Mariana de los Santos. We will offer simultaneous English to Spanish and Spanish to English interpretation to ensure accessibility and participation for a truly international audience. Plus, CEUs are included with registration. You'll have opportunities to network and to collaborate with colleagues from across Latin America and beyond. Get all the details now and register at www.ompac.mx. That's www.ompac.mx. We look forward to seeing you in Oaxaca as we continue strengthening the presence and the impact of applied behavior analysis in Latin America.
We've covered some great themes today with Dr. Parham, including self-reflection, burnout, bias, and a cool tangent on AI. I've curated these 4 episodes from our library for your enjoyment. Episode 67, Humility, Compassion, and Reflection with Dr. Nasia Cirincione-Ulizi and Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. Episode 81, The Burnout Epidemic, Understanding the Root Causes and Behavior Analysis with Cami Williams. Episode 158, Behavior Analysis and Artificial Intelligence with Jaron Cooper. And episode 214, Cultural Humility and Behavior Analysis with Quintera Tucker. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please follow us on Instagram @BehaviorSpeak.